Very good. Welcome to the Thursday edition of E-Rotary Coastal Club. I'm Phil Zimmerman, the E-Rotary Coastal Club president. Charles Gagne, I'm in Baton Rouge today. Charles Gagne, our president-elect, is the man at the maestro behind the technology. He's sitting in his home in Terrio, Louisiana, which is just south of Houma, right in the heartland of Louisiana, Gulf Coast, America. And I guess Gary's down in New Orleans in his office, and Tyler is probably in New Orleans in his office, and we have Chris with us today, who I'll introduce in a second. And but this is today's version of the E-Rotary Coastal Club. Glad you're with us. And we have a couple of traditions we do in Rotary clubs across America and around the world. But the first two may be unique in America. We usually start with a prayer and then a pledge, and then I think all Rotary clubs do the four-way test. So I'll start with a prayer and then do the pledge, and we'll get our four-way test underway. Lord, we just thank you for this day. We thank you for all the things that you're able to provide for us. Even when we're sleeping, you're still working on our behalf. And so, Father, we just thank you. We pray for all those in our coastal residents as they face a future of sea level rise and storm surges, and we have supposedly a record hurricane season coming that the forecasters are telling us that you would protect all the residences and properties along the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic Coast against any dangers of the forthcoming storm season. Don't forget California, Mexico, because they had a couple hit there last year as well. So we just put all that in your hands and pray for your protection. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Next thing we do is the Pledge of Allegiance, and we have a very, very nice furrowing flag out in the over the water somewhere with a sunset or sunrise behind it. Not really sure which that is. But either way, we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Very good. That's our Pledge of Allegiance. And then our last Rotarian tradition is the four-way test. This is something that goes way back in Rotary. It's of the things we think, say, or do. As Rotarians, we have a vocational practice in Rotary. That's the work that we do on a daily basis. And then we have work and service projects that we do within Rotary collectively. And Rotary came up with this four-way test of the things we think, say, or do specifically for the projects we serve on. But they are also hopeful that we take these same four items and put them into our daily practice in our lives as Rotarians, so we would display the life of a good Rotarian, whether we are in a Rotary meeting or in our community or on vacation or where we may happen to find ourselves. So first one, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? That's the Rotary four-way test. And through that four-way test, Rotary has grown from a small, humble beginning, I believe in Chicago, to 1.2 million members, 32,000 clubs worldwide. We are one of 330 e-clubs. So out of the 32,000 clubs, only 300 are 1% are e-clubs. So we are a far minority, but we have a reach which is global, which the brick and mortar clubs can't necessarily speak of. So this is pretty cool. Charles, you want to go to the next slide, which is, before I introduce Chris, I will, let me give you a couple of club items. Next week, or the next 2 weeks from today, we will probably switch to a different technology. We're currently using the join.me platform. Hopefully by then I'll get all the login information to everyone. Basically, we're going to be using Zoom. Zoom.us is the web address URL for the technology we'll be using. It's a very easy technology. You click it, it opens, and it works. It's very simple, and it allows for a larger interaction between members, which we have not really had the opportunity to do much sharing and face-to-face, and that platform is unbelievable for face-to-face, and that's really where I've used it myself. And it is very effective in that regard. The second thing I wanted to talk about is a grant that we recently submitted with the efforts of Charles and Tyler, they put together a grant in conjunction with America's Wetland Foundation, which of course is Val Marmillion's group. I think they're headquartered in Baton Rouge or maybe in New Orleans, but they have an office up here in Baton Rouge. And America's Wetland Foundation was able to secure some money with the Gulf of Mexico's fourth largest energy producer, BHP, which is an Australian company, and another organization called Resource Environmental Solutions, which so the tag word RES. So if you hear somebody talk about RES, they are started out as a wetland mitigation banking organization. So if somebody wanted to develop a wetland mitigation bank, they would do it for them. And they eventually got into the business of developing wetland mitigation banks, and now they're, they spoke at a press conference that Val Marmillion's group had 2 weeks ago that we broadcast a meeting from. They are now doing this nationwide. I think he said they had 4 offices in 14 different states, and so it's a pretty big organization. But we met at their nursery, and where they have all their plantings for these wetland mitigation projects that they support. So they're going to join with BHP and do a pretty cool project in South Terrebonne. It's called the Terrebonne Biodiversity and Resiliency Projects in Pointe-aux-Chenes and Bayou Terrebonne. And basically what they're going to do is they're going to do 2 things. One, they're going to build a cypress stand in some cypress swamp plantings, they call them, and also do some marsh terracing. They're going to plant 5,000 cypress trees, bald cypress trees, in the swamp, adjacent to one of the Terrebonne's levees that's in the area, and then also do some marsh terracing to help mitigate stormwater flow against the levee and help land creation in the area. And so they're going to plant 35,000 marsh grass plants in that as part of that as well, 35,000 plugs. And so what our role in this, we submitted a $2,000 grant to Rotary District 6200, and hopefully we will be approved. And we're really going to do community outreach and support for the event, buy some T-shirts for some people, hand them out, provide some food, tables, tents, refreshments, that kind of stuff during the actual planting for the people who will be out there planting and making them feel more comfortable. And so that will be our role in this project, is to help do the community outreach and the project support as Rotarians as people are out planting in the marsh. And hopefully we'll be able to get some Rotarians to join with us and go get in the mud and plant some trees, which is in Rison's our international president's desire is that each Rotarian would plant a tree, 1.2 million trees, and this is going to be 5,000 of them. So really looking forward to that project. That project will actually occur in November. It will start and end. I think the timeline is for November of 2018. With that, let me go ahead and introduce our speaker and get Chris started. Chris Dalbom is Program Manager for the Institute of Water Resources Law and Policy at the Tulane Law School. He is a past Senior Research Fellow at the Tulane Institute on Water Resource Law and Policy. He's done extensive work on legal policy issues relating to interstate water compacts, Mississippi River management, the Restore Act, and other revenue streams associated with the Deepwater Horizon disaster and coastal and water management. He currently leads the Institute's efforts to draft a comprehensive water code for Louisiana. Prior to coming to Tulane, Chris served in the Peace Corps in El Salvador and studied cultural geography in Louisiana and West Virginia. He has a Juris Doctorate from Tulane University, MA from LSU, and a BA from the University of Kansas. And with that, Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you, and looking forward to your program.
Thank you very much. I guess, let me know. Let's see, there we go. I have to accept this. My screen is being shared.
Very good.
And we are underway.
You're on your way.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you all very much for having me today. Before the call, I talked with with Phil and Charles for a minute, and when I was in high school, I got to go to a camp put on by the Rotary Club in Kansas City called Camp Enterprise, and I also had at least a small scholarship from the Rotary Club while I was at KU. So it was fond memories that I was able to do this for y'all. Before I get started, I want to go ahead and say if anybody has any questions or comments while I'm presenting, I'd love to hear them. You can either, I guess, unmute and just say, hey, Chris, hold up, or you can use the chat feature on the join.me. And I'd be happy to stop and delve in any topic that comes up during the course of this presentation. I've been told I have 40 minutes. I don't anticipate this, what I've got, taking 40 minutes, but I'm always surprised at how long I can talk about these things. So I undershot this year or this time in hopes that that'll put us right around 40 minutes for the presentation. I was thinking about talking about a series of sort of happenings within coastal law in Louisiana, but I'm decided to mainly focus on this sort of idea of ownership in the coast, and ownership meaning ownership of land and or water. And there's been, this has kind of been something that's been happening for a while now in terms of confusion over who owns what and how and why. And so I thought we'd go into this a little bit today. And again, if anyone's got anything to add or to question, please feel free to stop me in my tracks. So let's see if it's working. There we go. Home of the big mess. It is a mess right now. And when you're in law school and you're learning the rules of property law for Louisiana, it seems pretty simple. And then you start to get into it and you realize it is not simple at all whatsoever. And so I think home of the big mess probably could qualify for lots of aspects of our coastal situation right now. But we're going to focus on this sort of property law flank of it all. Let's start at the top. Let's start with Louisiana's Constitution, with Article 9. Article 9 is contains our public trust doctrine for the state of Louisiana, where voices the state's obligation to protect its resources, the things that the state owns as public things that the state owns on behalf of all of the people of Louisiana. And one of those things are water bottoms, and specifically navigable water bottoms, or as phrased in this Article 9, Section 3, the bed of a navigable water body. And we got to go kind of explore what navigable water body means from that point. But it's kind of what it sounds like. There's a few different definitions of navigable that end up getting used, especially when you're talking about federal law and the waters of the United States and the Clean Water Act and the Commerce Clause. But at a state law level, it's a pretty simple thing. If it's a highway of commerce, it is almost certainly a navigable water body. Public things. I referenced public things earlier, and so let's figure out what public things are. In Louisiana law, there are private things, there are public things, there are common things. Common things there aren't very many of. That's generally thought of as things like the high seas or the air, things that really can't be owned. Public things are things that are owned by the state but cannot be owned by private entities. And they're owned by the state as their capacity as a public person, and it means really they are the states to manage on behalf of the people. And then we've got an example of a list of examples. It's not exhaustive, but running waters, so the waters themselves, the waters and the bottoms of natural navigable water bodies. So then you're talking about not only the water, but the land that's underneath the water, territorial sea and the seashore. You can kind of see a theme connecting all of these examples of public things that are contained in Louisiana Civil Code Article 450. There are sort of that next line there about political subdivisions can have things such as streets and squares, but those are the water-related things are not things that the political subdivisions can own. So these are not things that the city of New Orleans or that Terrebonne Parish can own. They cannot own the waters. They cannot own the water bottoms of the navigable bodies. And so it really puts all of these water resources in the state's wheelhouse, and both as property for the state to use, but also it creates obligations for the state, things that the state has to is really obligated, is really owes to its people to care for. And we'll kind of go down another level from the codes to our statutes. And this is just a declaration of policy. This is just the state saying these are what they are what important to us. This is the beds and bottoms of all navigable waters and the banks or shores of bays, arms of the sea, the Gulf of Mexico, navigable lakes. They all belong to the state of Louisiana. And the state is declaring that these lands and water bottoms, referred to as public lands, shall be protected, administered, conserved to the best to ensure full public navigation, fishery, recreation, and other interests. And so this is the state declaring, acknowledging that obligation to protect, to administer, and to conserve. And we'll take it down another level. We'll take it to one of the Bibles for Louisiana lawyers. Yiannopoulos' Louisiana Civil Law Treatise. This is where he's talking about property, and he says, and this is where he's kind of distilling what all of the things we've been reading from, the Constitution, the Code, the statutes, and well as jurisprudence. The state's ownership of the sea bottom extends to the highest ordinary level of the seawater in the winter season, and that's a reference to a code article that says that the seashore, that the state goes to the highest winter tide. Although from what I understand, and maybe somebody on the call here can correct me, we don't necessarily have our highest tide in the winter season in Louisiana or in the Gulf of Mexico. However, that law, that code article, came from the Mediterranean, where they do have the highest tide in the winter season. And so that is just kind of, from what I understand, one of the quirks of our legal history, where we've got these codes and these articles and this tradition that goes all the way back to the Romans. But it also means that the state's ownership of navigable lakes extends to the knee-high water mark of 1812. And then lakes are kind of separated out here, away from streams, away from the shore necessarily. When lands are eroded by the waters of the sea or a navigable lake, the state ownership of the bottom extends beyond that 1812 mark. That's 1812 is when we became a state, and under the equal footing doctrine, states, when they joined the Union, the navigable water bottoms at that moment become state property. And this is something that goes back, we were just talking about the Mediterranean, now we have to go back to England. We have to go back to the 13 colonies, and as the 13 colonies were set up, the navigable water bottoms and things like the seashore and the sea bottom were the kings. And in England, they were the kings. And so they were never privately available in the 13 colonies to begin with. And so every state under the equal footing doctrine has come in with that same setup. to ownership of navigable water bottoms. Well, this is why we kind of have these rules. Navigable waters, meaning the ocean, meaning the shore, meaning the navigable lakes, meaning streams. They are, at its very most basic function, highways of commerce. And we like to have them, or need to have them, in public hands so that a private actor, maybe like the Black Knight, isn't placing themselves in the middle of these highways of commerce and derailing the resources, the highways that we need, be they water or be they streams or little tiny bridges over a ditch. Similarly, waters move, not just within the coast setting, but streams meander and streams wander. This is a plate of the Mississippi River showing former beds, former streams of it. And if you've got a property loss system that doesn't account for the movement of water bodies, then you've got a property loss system where you're going to have private landowners owning the water bottoms underneath streams, underneath any of these navigable bodies, and that is going to cause chaos and confusion in a way that's really untenable. And I think kind of what's happening now in terms of our coast and ownership of water bottoms and things is kind of proof of that. That when you don't stick to this sort of setup where it's a navigable water body, the water bottom is the state's, period, end of sentence. If you don't have that, then you end up in these confusing situations that we're seeing playing out along the coast. So given all of that, why do we end up with water bottoms that seem to be in private hands? This map that I've pulled up here, this is from the Orleans Parish Assessor's website. This shows the ownership of plots of land that are in the Bayou Bienvenue area. So to orient you, to the south of this is the lower Ninth Ward. To the north of this is New Orleans East. The line going through there is on the north. The blue line is the Intercoastal Waterway, and a lot of that is open water now. Once upon a time, it was swamp, and then we impounded it in a manner that made the swamp go away, and then it went quickly from swamp to marsh to open water. However, you've got a lot of people who are still claiming ownership of these plots. Once upon a time, the idea was they were going to drain that swamp and build a new subdivision back there, and clearly they plotted it all out. And so if we go back to that public things, then the parish probably, at least at one point, owned or was planning to own all of those streets, and private landowners were buying the plots. And so there's the 4 squares that are highlighted. That's 4 city blocks worth of open water that somebody is still claiming ownership to, and they are clearly not alone given the number of plots that were laid out there. And that's one kind of small version of this. And that's within the city, that's in New Orleans, and that is, if you see the area to the right there that was plotted out once upon a time, that's sewage and water board treatment plant. Again, if it helps you orient what you're looking at. But it's not just New Orleans, and it's not just these little piddly city plots. This is the Fouche Parish, it's off the Fouche Parish Assessor website, and we're looking at kind of that stretch there along the bottom at the end of Highway 1. In red is Old Highway 1, and you can kind of see that straight line shot of the new Highway 1 coming down towards Port Fourchon before it takes a turn and heads over to Grand Isle. And that polygon that's highlighted, that light blue polygon, that is owned by ConocoPhillips. Once upon a time, it was owned by LL&E. You can look at it and get a good idea as to, I think from this map, how much of that is land and how much of that is open water. But LL&E is still claiming that entire province. Well, ConocoPhillips is still claiming that entire polygon, and Booch Parish is happy to let them do that. Here's another view of that same area. This is just Google Maps, kind of a satellite view, and you can see, again, how a lot of that region is open water. And if I'll toggle back, you can see a lot of these other polygons around it are also in areas that are mostly open water. The polygon just on the other side, the larger one just on the other side of Highway 1, that's another LL&E / ConocoPhillips property. And you're talking, hundreds of thousands of acres, and this is the tax assessor's website, right? And so that means they are giving it, assigning it a value. They're assessing a value to it, and that value that they're assessing also impacts how much they're paying in property tax to the parish. And that is a clue as to where we're going with all this. So here again is that same area with Port Fourchon at the bottom, Leeville kind of in the middle, and Grand Isle to the right. Here it is just in map view without the satellite, and then it's pretty clear what's easily considered open water and what's considered still land. And by land, we mean presumably, marshland, wetlands. But let's look and see how the State Lands Office looks at it. As far as they're concerned, that's all pretty solid land. The dark blue with the lines, that is state water bottoms according to the State Land Office. And if we can go back and forth and see an awful lot of blue on this map that shows up as white on this map. And this is where all the confusion begins, I think. Because if you're out fishing or hunting or birding or kayaking or canoeing or boating, to go from some of this blue that's blue on here to some of this that's white on here, it's a pretty easy thing to do. And there's probably when you're on the ground there's no obvious rhyme or reason to it. And that's how we get things like this. This article from Todd Nasson a couple of years ago, talking about these sort of trespass laws and the ideas of keeping the anglers out of the marshes. These are the people that are really kind of caught in the middle of it. Is anybody really who's trying to use the land and use going by that black letter law we went over and going by this kind of map or this kind of map should pretty obviously be state-owned water bottoms, state-owned waters, and things that are available for the public that the state is caring for on behalf of the public. But when you look at this and you look at some of the issues that led this article to being written and some other, I'd be surprised if anybody on the call didn't know somebody who'd been run off of what seemed to be open waters and therefore an arm of the sea or therefore state property. It just makes for a pretty untenable situation. And that's how we end up with House Bill number 391. Representative Pearson brought this general session that's, I guess, still ongoing. This bill didn't pass. It was defeated, and in part because well, I won't get into the politics, I guess, because I can't speculate too much on that. But I presume it didn't pass because it probably wouldn't have worked anyway. This is from the text of that bill, and it stated that nobody can restrict public navigation of the waters. And then, however, we're not gonna apply running waters passing over privately owned water bottoms where the navigation is prevented. It seems to me that's exactly what you need to do. And the idea of having privately owned water bottoms in places that are accessible by, we'll skip down to D, watercraft powered by a combustible engine that may be used to navigate running waters. It's a contradiction in terms. If you're going back to our basic laws of the state, if it's open waters and you're pulling a boat through there, it's probably navigable. I mean, it's almost navigable in fact right there. The one exception to this that I'll go ahead and throw out, just so we don't get confused, is when you have a canal that was built by private funds, and it's a private canal that doesn't disrupt the natural waterway, then yeah, that private canal is privately owned, and those water bottoms within that canal are private. And so shortcutting through a canal is probably where we got to draw the line in terms of access when it comes to open waters. So I guess let's kind of get into like the why this is and all the sort of competing interests. Private landowners such as LL&E, they're in Lafourche Parish, that example, or everybody's holding on to those city grid parcels that are underneath open water and Bayou-Bienvenue Triangle. They're paying property taxes. The ones over in New Orleans might not be paying much, but the ones LL&E down in Lafourche Parish on those thousands upon thousands of acres, that adds up. That's a decent chunk of change that is coming into the parish government. If those were state-owned water bottoms, the state is not going to be paying a dime on those property taxes, and therefore it becomes pretty obvious what that parish government is going to want. The parish government is going to support the private landowners for as long as they can, because the private landowners are the ones who are largely funding that government's ability to function. And if we're talking about situations like we have today with most of coastal Louisiana, those parish governments are being asked to do more and more in terms of preparation for storms, in terms of adaptation for land loss, in terms of resiliency. And if they're at the very moment losing their tax base, at the same time they're trying to do more, it's a pretty obvious recipe for failure. The landowners themselves, and in Louisiana, it's usually oil and gas in terms of acreage of Louisiana's coastline. The vast majority of it is owned by private landowners, and our coast and those are usually oil and gas interests. They do have the capacity to manage those areas. It's the business that they've been in for decades. The state government really does not have the capacity to manage those areas. If the amount of water bottoms, even not just land, but if the state all of a sudden has to take care of or has those obligations to care for, or we kind of go back to that original slide with the Louisiana Constitution, the state has an obligation to care for those places on behalf of the public, and that's a big obligation, and they're not set up to really do that on a continually expanding basis in a way that keeps up with the parts of the coast that have been eroding or sinking and turning into open waters. And so from the administration perspective, it behooves them to just keep those lands in private hands. And then from the perspective of the private landowners, and again, this is usually oil and gas interests, they don't necessarily even want to own the surface. The surface is just what they have to own to get to the minerals underneath it. The surface in of itself is a liability, and these companies aren't in the land managing business. They're in the oil and gas business. And however, due to the traditional setup of Louisiana law, where the surface rights are inseparable from the mineral rights, they have to keep these lands and keep caring for these lands and really spending millions, in total, spending millions of dollars to maintain these lands. And sure, they can get other revenue streams out of them, things like leasing for hunting or fishing, but that's not what their business is. And that's more as a way to cover the sorts of costs that they're stuck with by having to continue to own these lands. And of course, if those lands switch to water bottoms, navigable water bottoms, state-owned navigable water bottoms, then the resources underneath them switch to the state as well. However, even though all of that kind of fits together, the state has more than one interest, I guess. And the easy short-term, near-term interest, it is in the state's interest not to suddenly have to manage a whole lot more of the coast than they're equipped to do. However, the state does need a lot of these lands to do the sorts of projects, to do the sorts of coastal conservation, protection, and restoration work that it is committing itself to do through the Coastal Master Plan, through QIPRA, through a variety of efforts. To do the sort of work that y'all are doing with the cypress tree planting. If you don't have a landowner who's amenable to doing that, then you don't have the project. And so that's, on a huge statewide scale, that's where the state is. That's where CPRA is at, is that they need to do these massive projects, but they also need landowners to work with. And it's not necessarily what the current landowners are in business for. So about 12 years ago now, Act 626 was passed. And the idea of this act was to provide an avenue for the separation of those mineral rights that the oil and gas companies, that the current landowners want, and the surface rights that people worried about conservation and protection and restoration need. And so the idea behind this was for the state to create, an exception to that rule that I mentioned about surface rights and mineral rights being always connected. It creates a way to sever those in a very specific set of circumstances. And those are where the surface rights would be sold either to the state or to a certified conservational trust. And then those lands, either in the trust's hands or in the state's hands, could be used for coastal conservation, restoration, protection. Meanwhile, the current landowner, the oil and gas interest, would get to keep the mineral rights and get to sever those from the surface, as well as get reassurances and get contractual access to reasonable access to to be it well sites, be it pipelines, be it the facilities that they need to access the minerals. But you might be thinking, well, if that was 2006 and it's 2018, why aren't we doing that yet? In 2007, the Attorney General's office came out with an opinion that basically said that the setup created by Act 626 was unconstitutional, that it would be the state giving away those public things. However, we think that they got it wrong. We say it was about speculative future water bottoms, things that aren't even the state's properties yet. Nor would they necessarily be giving them away, because they would be receiving the ability to do the sorts of coastal protection and restoration and conservation work that they wouldn't be able to otherwise. Additionally, the state would be able to use those lands and the contribution of those lands as potentially as an in-kind contribution to the non-federal share of projects with the Corps of Engineers, for example. If the state can suddenly have the state / the private conservation fund, I should say, suddenly have real estate valued at a couple of $1 billion total across the state, that's suddenly a big chunk towards those non-federal contributions for Corps of Engineers projects that could be done to take care of our coastline. But as I said, that 2007 opinion said none of that was legal. However, to the Attorney General office's credit, they revisited it in 2015 and reversed that position, which means that they can go forward with creating rules that need to be created in order for this program of separating mineral rights and surface rights in the coast to go forward. So for the last year and a half or so, CPRA and other state agencies have been working to put together the rules, to put Act 626 of 2006 into action. I haven't heard anything about it lately, though. And so if you have, if there's a question you want to ask of somebody, if you've got a friend at CPRA, that might be something to inquire about, where they are in that rulemaking process. But it is something that we see as a very useful tool in Louisiana's coastal restoration toolbox. And that about wraps up everything I had to say about this. Well, how are we on time?
Chris, doing fine.
We're doing fine on time?
Yep,
okay.
Yep.
Well, you know what? Let me just, since I pulled them up, and it came up recently, and I think Gary might have been asking about this. So we write a newsletter here out of our shop every week called TU Waterways. It's about water issues, local, international, interplanetary. It's only 2 pages long. We try to keep it readable and useful. Well, we mentioned a couple of these things in this most recent article, so I thought I'd talk about them a little bit. So this is other coastal law issues that have come up. There were a couple of cases just last week that I thought were noteworthy and worth talking about. This case that I've brought up right now, this is from down in on the east bank of Plaquemines Parish, private landowners suing some pipeline companies for not holding up their end of the contract for the right-of-way. And it's, I think, probably the single most common thing that you see when people have complaints about pipelines is the pipeline canal expanding beyond, or sometimes far beyond, the right-of-way that they've been contracted for. And that's precisely what they were suing about in this case. And I think if this case stands, it's going to create a pretty useful precedent for other landowners who are unhappy about how far and how wide pipeline canals on their property have spread. This was covered in the media a little bit and framed claimed as kind of a bit of a loss really for the plaintiffs, because the damages that were awarded were a little over $1,000. So it sounds like nothing more than a moral victory there. But one of the things that this judge also did was order, let's go, skip on down, don't read too hard just yet, order the defendants to fix the land loss, really, and to create an injunction, and to direct the defendants, to direct the pipeline companies to recreate the wetlands that have disappeared as the canal has spread beyond the right-of-way. And so that $1,104 really is just about parts of the land, parts of the property that it would be unfeasible to do the sort of restoration work that the plaintiffs were calling for. So not only are the defendants, oil and gas, the pipeline companies, on the hook to fix these 9.6 acres of wetlands, but the judge also appointed a special master to oversee the process and really, so not only did the judge say that the pipeline companies have to do this work, she's actually putting somebody in charge of making sure that they do it, which is an extra step that sometimes gets forgotten and sometimes stops those injunctions from actually taking place. And then the other one that came out recently was the state court judge in St. James Parish, who found that the coastal use permit the Department of Natural Resources granted for the Bayou Ridge pipeline was not done correctly. And that's one where, I mean, you all do stuff in the coast, and so you're all familiar with coastal use permits, I'm assuming. And I'd love to hear if somebody has a different opinion of them. In my experience, coastal use permits have been pretty rubber stampy in Louisiana. And so if this is the beginning of a little more scrutiny going into granting coastal use permits, I think that'll be a very interesting development for Louisiana's coast. I think that's about all I had prepared. I'd love to take some questions and chat about this topic. This is stuff that we can go on and on about for a long time.
Thank you, Chris. I do want to got a couple of comments for you. This is, I'm always amazed at our speakers because they open my eyes to an entirely new horizon of issues that we're dealing with in the coast, and I've always been curious about this particular issue, and no one has really addressed it. And so I'm glad that you did. I can definitely see the legal issues are tremendous. The interests of the state, it's almost a conflict, because if the state really, so the state's collecting taxes right now, but they could actually collect the actual oil and gas revenue if they reclaim the property, and so there really is almost a conflict there between the state and the landowner if they don't restore the surface rights. I mean, if they don't restore the surface, so I can see that the need that the oil and gas companies, I guess, would be very interested in separating those two, so that does not happen, that the state says, well, that's so sorry that you lost your land, you didn't maintain it. Thank you very much for the oil and gas wells you just drilled us.
Yeah, I think there you get into the political reality of that decision. Makes it hard to imagine the state pulling that trigger. And then the other thing is, I think noteworthy is that those property taxes, those are going to the parishes, not necessarily to the state.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
and those are keeping coastal political subdivisions afloat.
And I loved seeing that little article of the fishermen getting involved in this. They're just fishing. There's no land here. What do you mean? Somebody owns this water?
Right.
Never heard of such a thing. So I can definitely see it being a very big issue. And then that last one in regards to the expansion of the pipeline right-of-way, I can also see that becoming a huge issue, because that's a lot of the argument, that the pipelines have caused the coastal erosion issues, which they've had a contribution to it. There's no doubt, but it's not the pipeline itself. There's a whole ecological reality that we're dealing with sea level rise, cutting off the Mississippi rivers, and really a lot of the streams. It's contributing to this issue that we're having. Subsidence, all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Let me open it up and see if anyone has any other questions for you.
Yeah, hi, this is Gary. Chris, thank you for doing this. Really appreciate it. I have 3 questions in 8 parts each. I'm just kidding. Actually, I have 2. So I think I'll follow. Help. Somebody who knows nothing about the law like me to understand the judge's recent decision about the erosion case, finding the pipelines like what, $2,000 or something.
Yeah.
Versus with the argument of millions for destruction of the coast starting in the 30s. What are we supposed to make of that?
Well, I think this case is really, and it's a very kind of direct, easily seeable sort of. Really, it's a contract, violation more than anything else. It's between the pipeline company and the landowner, and it's the right of way. The right of way gives you, 20, 25, 45, 50, 60 feet, and your canal is now expanded to 200 feet, and it's taken up the rest of my, taken over my land. And so that's, I think, why it was a pretty, it's one kind of our many, cuts, literal and metaphorical to our coast. But so that's one thing about this, is it's a contract case between a single, landowner, a group of landowners, and a single company or group of companies. And it's about that really easily measurable loss along a linear path. And it doesn't get into all of the other things that we can point to various causes for.
Yeah, it seems like it kind of dropped the whole culpability issue, and I hate to use that as a legal term, but for those of us that hear all the time that we lose a football field every hour and on, and and then you see the settlement. It's okay, 2,000, and you have to replace 38.
Yeah. Well, I think partly, one of the big complaints when you talk about trial lawyers is that they're getting rich, and none of the stuff is actually getting fixed. And this kind of case, this kind of results really makes that argument hard to make. And you're going for, and then you say you're the landowner and you are looking for your land to get fixed. This is the kind of case. This is the kind of judgment you want. If you're a landowner and you're looking to get rich, this is not what you want. And so it's $1,000, $2,000 doesn't look like much, but I'm sure somebody in here who probably could tell me what the cost is going to be to recreate 9.6 acres of marshland along a canal. Probably going to cost a bit more than $1,000.
Yeah, $500K or something like that. But okay, well, I have another one, but I don't want to hog the time that we have left. So if anybody else has a question first, speak up. Stan, you still with us?
Yeah,
okay,
I'm still here. I'm still here.
Hey, Stan. You got a question for us?
Well, just had a comment. And thanks, Chris, for all of this. And there is I'm from Florida, and there's a very interesting case that was decided sort of last week, in which a rock pit company made a deal to supply water to some municipalities, and this is in Martin County, which is just to the north of Palm Beach, and was sued by a group of county commissioners of Martin County and some environmental organizations because of the fact that it appears as though they were selling the actual water to the utilities as opposed to providing conveyance, which is what they argued. So it's kind of this will be appealed and appealed and appealed because the person who was defeated in the judgment was the sister of Janet Reno, and she knows how to manipulate the courts. And there was also a couple commissioners that are now under federal indictment for withholding information through emails and that type of thing about communications and how they violated Florida sunshine laws. It's a true mess. And so if you want some information on that case, I can send it to you because it will get national attention eventually.
Yeah, and that's, one of those things where you go back to the really basic kind of idea of the water itself as the thing of the people, as something that private people can't own. And you get into, when you start talking about this stuff for the first time, then you say, well, how the hell do they sell bottled water? And it's a really good question. When you're just looking at what the law is, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And that's true of, some utilities. They can they can charge for the conveyance, right? And they can charge for the cleaning of the water, and they can charge for the infrastructure, but they cannot charge for the water because it's not theirs to charge for. And, every single state has different, water laws. And Florida's are different from Louisiana's, but that idea of water as something that you can't own is, fairly common.
At least east of the Mississippi.
Correct. Well, and even in the West with prior appropriation, you're still not owning the water. You're owning the right to use the water.
Yeah.
Let me. I do have another question to ask you because again, you've opened up a whole other topic for us, and that has to do with the transparency of the state and of the parishes to truly show the land loss that has occurred and or the current situation, as the two maps that you were showing, the one by the parish, which is showing, we're in great shape, look at all this beautiful land we have down here. And in reality, there is no land, or there's only 60% of what's being shown on the map is actually there. Is there anything that we can do as residents of the state to have our state and parishes accurately reflect the actual conditions? Because I think that really hinders us as a state and as people who are interested in helping coastal issues to be able to communicate that we really have an issue, when in fact our regulatory agencies are not showing that we have any issue at all. That makes any sense. It's kind of like that the king has no clothes, and everybody's, we're just fine. Mm-hmm. When in fact we're not fine.
Right. And then you do get the sort of what you're looking for, right, is consistency across the government. And when you've got different, agencies with different cultures and different missions, it's hard to do that. And I think, if you're talking to CPRA, it's pretty clear, that where this land stops, where the water begins, and then the problems that we're having to address for it. But when the other parts of the government, be it DNR, be it Office of Lands or State Lands Office, which is now part of Division of Administration. When they've got decades-old missions, if not centuries-old missions, it's hard for them to change. And then you're right, it does end up with these sorts of situations that you have to think limits the state's effectiveness.
Well, very good, Chris. Well, we appreciate your presentation, your time for us today. Another very informative presentation at E-Rotary Coastal Club. We want to thank you for what you've provided us today. And if no one has any other questions, we'll go ahead and sign off. So
thank you very much.
Everything very good. Thank you, Chris. Have a fantastic day. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward in 2 weeks for another great meeting. Thank you all. You all have a great day.
All right. Bye.